It's kind of funny is in England, the nobles that own castles still, they live in some of the rooms of the castle, but they basically rent out the rest, or they have tours. So tourists come and see their place, and they might even be involved in trying to, show the place to visitors, because they need the money, because they still have all sorts of bills to pay for the land, but the land itself doesn't really make as much money as a factory does. You could sit up and sell Microsoft products, or something. So you can imagine, the change and how the wealthy in European countries now usually not the nobles. So there is that conflict there. Well, for Marx, the conflict now was between the proletariat and the bourgeois who owned the work and were basically trying to get as much money out of their products as possible by paying as little for the creation of these products, which meant that you had impoverished individuals living in slums. And by the way, notice that John Stuart Mill is in England at the same time, and he is concerned about the status of the people living in these slums and using new scientific methods to try to figure out what could be causing the problems in the slums, and trying to figure out how to help the situation in the slums. And medically, one of the big problems a lot of these people in England had was the children had rickets, and they didn't know what caused it. And they remember that sailors would often get scurvy, and what they discovered was vitamin C would help prevent scurvy. And so the captains of the ships would take on citrus fruits in order to try to help keep their crew from getting scurvy. And in fact, one of the favorite fruits for the captains were limes. And I don't know if you're familiar with it, but the British are often called limeys. There you go. That's where that came from. But what's kind of interesting is they figured out that the reason people were getting rickets is because of a lack of sunshine. And not only were they working underground, if you get to see the video of, I'm pretty sure I have it, but here she is with the statue of Marx, where he's buried. He's buried in London.
Capitalism's most implacable in this wood that would help shape his understanding of how the world works.
This was one of the changes in the laws.
Peasants taking sticks from the forest floor to use as firewood were being prosecuted for theft. Wood had been gathered here for centuries, but now the landowners had declared it belonged to them. What had been freely shared was now private property. You could say that thinking about this question turned Marx into an economist, but I wouldn't really capture it. He came to think that economics, the nature of economic relationships between people, were at the heart of absolutely everything.
The foundations of Marxist thinking was materialism, that when you cut away religion, ideology, politics, at its root were the material relations between man, the need for food, the need to have a roof over your head. This is what ultimately drives so much of human interaction.
What was unique in Marx, he didn't see economy just as a special sphere. He saw economy as the structuring principle of the entire social totality.
For Marx, it all begins with private property, which divides the world starkly. There are those that have it, and those that don't. Take this wood. Before it became private property, I could do what I like with it. I could heat my house with it. I could make a chair and exchange it for food. But if it belongs to someone else, the whole relationship changes. Now Marx would say, I become a member of the proletariat. Now I have to work for the owner of the wood, the capitalist, for a wage. Then he can sell what I've made for more than he paid me. Look what's happened. Something that was part of my life is now a financial transaction. The capitalist made profit. He can use that to buy more wood, build factories, make more profit, and so it goes on. Profit is now the heart of everything.
Let me find where
So there you
she's.
have it, the Marxian view of capitalism is.
So she goes in these caves you can, mines you could visit.
The man, you can see it far side, he had a pick and shovel and he'd work the coal, fill that course, and then his wife had to drag that coal behind her to a loading point, which could be up to 30-40 metres away.
I didn't realise that they were their husband and wives, weren't they?
Oh yeah, it were all families. They need a little boy or a little girl to work this job as well.
So but if you took the job, you had to sort of provide a small child.
Yeah.
So
The only light there between them was a candle which the dad kept, so he could see when he was coffee. So the little boy or girl was sat on their own in the dark for 12 hours a day.
It is difficult to overstate the horror of industrialisation in Europe. In 1829, Liverpool, for example, the life expectancy at birth was about 28 years. And that was the lowest age since the Black Death. So the impact of the Industrial Revolution on life chances was absolutely terrifying.
by 1849, his revolutionary writings had got Marx banned from everywhere but Britain.
And that's because
He
Britain
had
could
concerns
care less.
The power money had to ruin lives, at a suitably safe distance, of course. I think in the last few minutes I've come closer to what it was actually like, the drudgery of Victorian times, than Karl Marx ever did. He never went to a mine, and as far as we can tell, he only went to a factory once, towards the end of his life. It didn't stop him writing vividly about the horrors of Britain's dark satanic mills.
So I suppose in defense of Marx, this kind of problem was horrendous, and he was surrounded by it. And his thought was that a communism would essentially do away with private property. So that's the whole point of the Communist Manifesto. It's actually a lot of interesting stuff. This is a good video, by the way. They make good stuff, the BBC.
As usual, he had a grand analysis of the history of the world. He saw the great sweep of humanity's endeavours from the caveman to the slave societies of Greece and Rome to the feudalism of kings and castles, all of which was replaced in turn by our own capitalist system of bosses and workers. Incredibly unfair, but also incredibly productive. Marx said only when we got everything we could out of capitalism could we afford to have a revolution. In his words, the knell of capitalist private property sounds. The expropriators are expropriated, all to be replaced by more or less nothing. Irritatingly, there's next to no alternative laid out.
Marx, basically, was not the one who simply gave us a blueprint, 5 stages after capitalism, communism, here you have the basic guidelines, what to do and so on. No, it's up to us. He just opened up the field.
Is there an alternative to capitalism? I've no idea. Marx says that people there's dead silence, starvation.
That's Peter Hitchens, by the way.
Or the end of the world. Really, I simply have
You're
no
familiar
idea
with Christopher.
if there is an alternative. It doesn't occur to me. It seems to me to be important. It's like saying, is there an alternative to weather?
Marx said we couldn't describe what the next stage of human development would look like any more than a feudal serf could have described our lives today. To which you might say, fair enough. Except you might also think it was pretty telling. After all, nobody else has been able to describe a convincing alternative to capitalism either.
I think he would have written a lot more had he lived 10 years more on what a socialist republic would look like. And who knows, but that might have saved the world a lot of bother.
Oh, well, I'll let it go.
Without his blueprint, we all know what happened next. There weren't any revolutions in the rich, developed countries, as Marx predicted. Instead, it happened in one of the world's poorest nations. Soviet Russia may have left Marx far behind, but it was an attempt to try something else. Many have drawn lessons from its failure.
The truth is, at the moment, there are different forms of capitalism, but on the big argument about whether you really want to have a communist system or a capitalist one, that is pretty much won everywhere, I think.
There are more humane versions of capitalism or more barbaric forms of capitalism. But I don't think there's a systemic alternative to capitalism. Will there ever be? Yes, I would think so. I mean, nothing is forever. Absolutely nothing. And capitalism is not forever.
But anyone looking for a fairer alternative knows they can't ever repeat what happened east of the Berlin Wall. Dictatorship, political oppression, and millions of ruined lives.
So let me get right to it. The End of History was written 30 years ago it came out in the summer, well actually it's 30 and a half years, more like 31 years. It was published in June of 1989. I was in the State Department at the time, so it was before the fall of the Berlin Wall. And I have now spent 31 years being asked, well, what about the end of history? Wasn't that completely wrong? And this didn't start recently. I mean, this started virtually the moment I published that piece. So I just want to get a couple things out, just so there's not any misunderstanding. The end of history was not my phrase. It comes from the philosopher Hegel. History, in his understanding, is what we would today call modernization or development. And end did not mean termination, it meant objective, target. And so the question of the end of history is, where does the modernization process lead to? What's the highest form of human, social, and political organization? And what I said was, the Marxists, for the last 150 years, have been saying the end of history is going to be communism. And my observation in really the summer of 1988 or the winter of 1988-89, when Gorbachev was reforming the Soviet Union, was that it didn't look like we would get there. That we would stop at the stage before communism, which the Marxists called bourgeois democracy, and I didn't see a higher form of society that would replace liberal democracy. All right, so that was the thesis. So people keep asking me, do I still believe it? I believe it in the following form. I have not heard anyone posit an alternative political economic form other than liberal democracy tied to a market economy that I think will be a higher form of human civilization that will produce higher levels of prosperity and more happiness for the people that live in it. The only alternative that I think is a serious one is actually the one that the Chinese have been developing, because it's definitely not democratic and it's been quite successful economically. And I've always said right from the beginning that, another 20 years or so, if they're richer than the United States and they're still stable and it looks like it's an ongoing enterprise, then I'll admit I was wrong. There really is an alternative, and that may be it. But I don't really, I have reasons for thinking that may not be the case. Now, if you fast forward 30 years, obviously, we're living in a very different period. We're not expanding the world democracies anymore the way we were in 1989. And in fact, we've been in a period of setback. It's taken two forms. So one is the rise of Russia and China, authoritarian regimes that are very aggressive and self-confident. And the other form is the rise of populism in the United States, in Britain, in Hungary, in Poland, in